Today's video is brought to you by one of my favorite services in existence, Audible. Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment, all in one place. Not only audiobooks, but also original entertainment and podcasts. I'm super busy and often I don't have time to sit down and read. So instead, I'll throw on an audiobook when I'm driving or walking or sometimes even working, and that's why I have over a month of listening time on Audible. Almost every single Star Wars Legends and canon book is available on Audible. I highly recommend you go for the unabridged books, but if you're looking for a different kind of recommendation, I also would suggest the Area X trilogy. There are a ton of Audible features I love. You can connect to Wi-Fi, download whatever books you want to listen to later, then go offline if you want. You get monthly credits which roll over if not used, and you can even swap out an audiobook if you're not enjoying it. Right now, you can go to audible.com/EckhartsLadder, or you can text EckhartsLadder to 500 to get a free month of Audible, including one audiobook, which you keep even if you cancel the service without paying. Again, that's audible.com/EckhartsLadder. Links to everything down in the description. Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another video. So, how did the Rebel Alliance manage to actually engage the much larger empire in what seemed to be large-scale warfare? Unsurprisingly, much of this is covered in the Essential Guide to Warfare, which gives us a very detailed view of the Alliance's organization and strategy throughout the war. We'll take a look at that today, and we'll also contrast that with how things changed during the New Republic era. Alright, so one of the first things to recognize is that in Star Wars Legends especially, we very rarely see the full scope of the Alliance. Most of the time we're attached to Fleet Command, which was one of the major parts of the Alliance's military, but not the sole part. The Rebel Alliance could generally be separated into Fleet Command, Starfighter Command, and Sector Forces. So Sector Forces is a somewhat vague term, and that's not accidental. There were thousands of sectors across the galaxy where the Rebel Alliance had some presence. And there'd be huge variation here. Some sectors would have an entire fleet actively operating against the Empire in the area, while other sectors would have just a few rebel saboteurs or some comms personnel sending information to the rest of the Alliance. And this is actually something Star Wars Rebels, although canon, shows fairly well. Although of course there was an Alliance central structure, a lot of what was actually happening across the galaxy was heavily decentralized. Sector forces were technically under formal Alliance command, but practically were subject only to several common rules, with the general purpose of working against the Empire. That's not to say that there was never more cooperation or collaboration. It seems like on occasion the Alliance fleet would either take or give ships to local sectors depending on strategic need, but there was a lot of politicking here which could really disrupt things and make that difficult, especially where sector forces have their own responsibilities, which they may not be able to meet if they're giving assets to the Alliance fleet. Early on in the war, the Alliance did actually try a coordinated strategy which was known as Operation Domino. Here, sector forces were meant to take planets, then basically hide under planetary shield, making them difficult for the Empire to usurp. This, however, was not very successful, and while the Alliance did have a few worlds openly in revolt, like Mon Calamari, generally rebel forces instead operated as cells, and again, as the war went on, there was more and more centralized power in the fleet itself as led by Admiral Akbar. In a way, this sort of reminds me of the Clone Wars, or at least what the Clone Wars actually was versus what we see on the screen. We're led to believe that the Clone Wars is fought entirely by the fleets of the CIS and the Republic, Venators versus Providences, but in reality, a lot of the fighting would have actually been done by local sector forces. We see, for example, the Umbarans, but in reality, there would have been tens of thousands, if not more, planets bringing up arms and fighting for their cause. The difference was that the sector forces for the Alliance weren't, as I mentioned, holding planets. They often weren't in open revolt, though sometimes they were. Instead, imagine what we see in Star Wars Rebels again, maybe the Ghost and a few other ships on a small scale being supplied information, technology, and resources by the Alliance to revolt against the Empire in whatever way possible. Just a reminder though, the Rebels did have a main fleet, but it is hard to say by the time of, say, the Battle of Endor, how many of those ships were a part of the main Rebel fleet, and how many of those were taken from sector forces due to the sort of once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to strike at the Empire. Anyway, after the Battle of Endor, it's very likely that sectors Wars, which had lots of rebel forces present and which were generally sympathetic to the rebel cause, were among the first new members of the Alliance of Free Planets and later the New Republic. However, while this general strategy would work for a faction openly rebelling against a centralized empire, after the Battle of Endor, the Rebel Alliance massively changed its military strategy. And again, we're talking Star Wars Legends. It's interesting because that's not necessarily the only option. In Star Wars Legends, the Alliance, or the New Republic, chose to create a strong central military after the Battle of Endor, and they used that to openly attack warlords. However, in Star Wars canon, or if you look back to the Ruusan-era Republic, they relied more on decentralization. Republic member states were more or less responsible for defending themselves, and there was only a small token defense fleet. Before we continue to our examination of the New Republic, I do think it is worth noting that the New Essential Guide to Warfare actually says explicitly that the Rebel Alliance had 7% of the Imperial fleet strength and 3.5% of the Empire's troop forces. That's actually a lot more than you usually see either in the movies or in just mainstream content, where it seems like the rebels have, if they're lucky, 1% of the total strength of the Empire. Anyway, as I was explaining, the New Republic instead relied on a strong centralized navy and at the beginning had 4 major fleets. These fleets were not only given a specific part of space to patrol and protect, but were also each given individual mandates, usually related to major warlord threats during the early New Republic era. These 4 fleets were largely responsible for fighting for a secure New Republic in the early days after the Battle of Endor. At this point, despite being the mastermind of the New Republic's overall strategy, Admiral Ackbar was actually leading a fleet personally. And when I say fleet, by the way, that may be slightly misleading. In reality, one single fleet would have been made up of many battle groups, which themselves would have been broken up into different capital ship pairings and whatever else, so one fleet isn't necessarily all in the same place at one time. Anyway, the New Republic would still sometimes create special forces or special fleets for specific purposes. A great example of that, which I've talked about before on the channel, would be the fleet meant to hunt down Warlord Zinj. But as the New Republic became more and more successful and defeated more Imperial warlords, eventually the 4 fleets were more tied closely to geographic positions within the galaxy, and another fleet, the 5th Fleet, was created, and as we see in the Black Fleet Crisis, was used as sort of a mobile fighting force, and there were worries that this would cause the New Republic to be somewhat imperial or imperialistic, though I would argue, at least during the New Republic's reign, that those fears were never really brought out. But guys, that's my basic look at the organization of the New Republic and Rebel Alliance forces. Do you have any questions? Feel free to let me know down in the comment section, and of course, if you have any ideas for future videos, I would love to see those as well. Till next time, guys, have a good one, be safe, and may the Force be with you.